Peace, family. How everybody doing tonight? Good stuff, good stuff, good stuff. I'm honored to be here. I'm glad that everybody is here. I'm happy to share this space with y'all this evening. So my name is Anthony Dandridge. I'm a faculty member in the second oldest black studies department on the planet. Right here at SUNY Newport. Right here at SUNY Newport. This is the inaugural Dr. A.J. Williams-Myers lecture series. I am proud to walk in the footsteps of this man at this university. Since his transition last year, we are seeking to honor him as we move forward. So this is the beginning of a lecture series that will be a staple of this department from here forward. The name of my presentation today is called Black Lives MAAT, an Afrocentric framework for belonging. That's me right there. In accordance with those traditions, right, those things that are passed down from generation to generation, I would like to do a libation to get us started. It's a way of honoring the ancestors, understanding our relationship between the past and the future in a variety of different ways. But what is going to be particularly unique and special about this libation, I'm going to pull it up on YouTube. I'm going to have, we're going to have a video libation of one that was done some years ago by Dr. Greg Carr. Dr. Greg Carr is the chair of the Afro-American Studies Department at Howard University. Where he's doing this libation is in New York at the African Burial Ground. At that African burial ground, Dr. A.J. Williams-Myers was the lead historian for that African burial ground in New York City. In accordance with the tradition of us giving libations, I will take some water. Water is a symbol of life. I will be pulling in his vase to these beautiful flowers just after the holiday. Life to life. Because within an African worldview, which I will be getting into a lot later on in this presentation, all things are vibrant. Energy is constantly moving. It just changes space. So we will follow Dr. Carr in his libation. I will be pouring some water into this vase, and at some point in the libation, he will ask people to call out names of their ancestors that you want to be honored in this space. Feel free to contribute. You don't have to wait for other individuals, right? But you'll see as he's giving a libation, he'll say, you know, say whomever's name you want to honor in this space. All right, and I am honoring, I would like to start that off just by saying up front, I honor Dr. A.J. Williams-Myers. After, every time you pour some water, you say the word Ashe. It's a reflection of that energy that is in all spaces, like an affirmation. Saying, so be it, I acknowledge this reality.
We'll pour into the creative spirit, the great Ashe out of which we all emerge. Ashe. Ashe. We pour to that creative spirit by whatever name we know it, whatever name you hold in your heart, in your mind, whatever name your ancestors gave, whatever name you learned as a child, whatever name you believe it to be, whatever name you believe it to be in spirit or in science. Ashe.
Ashe.
We pour to the first human beings who came into existence on this planet, the first human beings who raised the first structures, who cooked the first meals, who taught the first children, who had the first children, the first Africans, the first people, who stood upright, who walked, who figured out how to stay on this planet, who figured out how to pass that knowledge on to their their children and their children's children, the mothers and fathers of civilization. Ashe.
Ashe.
We pour the next libation to their grandchildren, their children's children, those who raised the great early civilizations of Kemet and Kush and Monomotapa, the great medieval civilizations of Ghana and Mali and Songhai and Kanem-Bornu. We pour to those who bring the great civilizations of the Igbo people and the Hausa people and the Kikongo people and the Mabara people, the great Mande civilizations, the great Kikongo, the great civilizations of Southern Africa, the Bantu people, the great civilizations of Southeast Africa, the Dinka, the Shilla, the Noor. We pour to those millions who raised the foundation from which the world would learn what it meant to be human in the world. Ashe.
Ashe.
We pour to their children who were from the arrival on the shores of people they had never seen before, found themselves captured and marched overland, found themselves perishing by the millions before they were held on the holding cells and the open air pens on the coast of West, Central, Southern, and East Africa. We pour to the ancestors who did not know as they were stripped of all clothing and sent denuded into boats, packed like animals, and strewn their bones across the floor of the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean. We pour to them who in the last moment on Africa grabbed the sand and grabbed the dirt and put it in their mouths and understood that the only thing they might have to preserve their place in that continent was their memory of that place and their ability to pass it on to their children. We pour to them. Ashe.
Ashe.
We pour to those Africans and their children who finding themselves cast adrift in Santiago, Cuba, who found themselves cast adrift in Porto Spain, Trinidad, and Port-au-Prince, Haiti, who found themselves cast adrift in New Orleans and Charleston and Mobile, who found themselves cast adrift in Salvador Bahia, who found themselves cast adrift in Barbados and the archipelago that formed the wayward and the windward coast. We found them in these places learning Portuguese and Spanish and French, whose often first words was, "Oh my God, oh Madre de Dios," who found themselves praying to survive and pass on to their children the memories. We pour to those ancestors who are represented in the thousands buried in all the square miles of where we stand, and who sit here buried before us in 400 caskets forged of wood from West Africa with the Adinkra symbols. Each one of them, each woman, man, and child, symbolic of millions. The children of those who could not be killed, we pour Ashe.
Ashe.
We pour to their children who somehow survived the hells of enslavement and fought for emancipation in the Caribbean, the French, British, Dutch Caribbean, who fought for emancipation in South America, who fought for emancipation in Central America, who fought the struggles we refer to as the Civil War in the United States, who came out of that, marched out of enslavement through Reconstruction, and found themselves making great migrations, eventually ending up in places like New York. Their children's children, who making a way for themselves, became our great-great-grandparents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our parents. Those who, when the first bones were discovered in this space, held their hands and said, "Stop! No more!" We are here to speak for those who can no longer speak with their mouths. We pour for those ancestors, some of whom came to Howard University in 2004 and followed these caskets all the way back to New York. We pray to the great ancestors, the ones whose names we know and the ones whose names we don't. And at this moment, as we pour this libation, I would ask anyone who feels comfortable to say the name of someone in your bloodline who is no longer physically here, but who you know made it possible for you to be here. Go ahead, let's hear the name.
Julie Davis. Paul Dandridge. James Davis. Blandell Davis.
Ganga Zumba in Brazil. Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and Henri Christophe in Haiti. We pour to the great Avengers, Nanny of the Maroons of Jamaica. We pour to the great ancestors, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass. Say the names that you study. Who are the names of the ancestors that you have come to hold in your heart and your mind as you hope that you can do what they did for us, for your children and children's children? Let's say some of those famous names.
Carter G. Woodson. W.E.B. Du Bois. Malcolm X.
And finally, two final libations. We pour to those who make it possible for us to do what we do. We pour to these rangers who stand guardian over this sacred space. We pour to these Africans and these folks who have come from Howard University, the staff, the faculty, the administrators who brought us here today to bear witness. This is not a libation, but an affirmation, because their hearts still beat, their tongues still speak, their minds still think, and their minds still wish the best for us. We pour for all of those people who surrounded us on this journey today and made it possible for us to be here. We pour this affirmation of thanks, Ashe. And finally, we pour to your children's children's children who will one day stand on this space and speak your name. Ashe. America is not a nation.
That really sets the tone for it. As we start to understand how far we've came and how far we still need to go. What we do in this space, we see truth-telling as something particularly sacred. Just speaking the truth. I've had individuals over the last 2 weeks say, Anthony, what you gonna say? Are you concerned about how it might impact your employment? That's in the back of my mind. But I know that as long as I speak the truth, irrespective of what happens, I'm going to be all right. I've gotten this far, and I got faith and understanding that me speaking the truth is nothing less than what anybody else should be asking me to do. Just speak the truth. And be open for dialogue and discussion about it. Peace, family. So that was our libation. But in accordance with the spirit of Sankofa, that African Adinkra symbol of a bird with its head turned backwards, to return and or go back and fetch it. We embrace our ancestors, elders, and the extended community as valuable teachers within the community, as all people contribute to the reservoir of meaning that humanity draws upon for sustenance. The community helps us understand the past so it can benefit our present, future, and unborn. I want to name the land. As all human beings are descendants of those first peoples in Africa. All human beings are descendants of those first peoples in Africa. All human beings are descendants of those first people in Africa to populate this planet over 200,000 years ago. Knowledge of this fact helps us all to understand our common ancestors, our common conditions as social beings, and ultimately our common reality. Accordingly, all communities, without exception, in part owes its being, vivacity, and limitation to the extensive generations of ancestors that have contributed to our individual and communal lived realities. Throughout history, this has in part been expressed as a series of relationships that have manifested themselves in this very moment, as all things one does and does not do impacts all others at all times. All things one does and does not do impacts all things at all times. Silence is real. On this land, many were brought against their will. On this land, others came in search of opportunities. And on this land, still others have lived here as managers, cultivators, and cousins of the earth. Facts are not fake news. The truth both hurts and heals. But the well-being of any individual or community is in part rooted in the self-reflection, critical thinking, and the establishment of solidarity across ethnicities, races, genders, sexual orientations, class, and even organizations. In many ways, solidarity is mutual, respect is relational. I want to start by acknowledging what has been buried, by honoring the truth. We are standing on the ancestral lands of the Esopus and Lenape people. We pay respect to their ancestors, elders, youth, and unborn. Our gathering here today is in part due to the relationships we have to traditions of violence that unjustifiably have taken lives. We are participating in disrupting, displacing, and decentering these marginalizing lived realities of human beings. Your work and our work is also in part due to our efforts at truth-telling, with the intent of making uncomfortable spaces more comfortable. And even some comfortable spaces a little uncomfortable. And co-creating liberational spaces for all comfortable and uncomfortable folk. By the amplification of voices, alignment of purpose, and acknowledgement of difference, we shall never forget. Black Lives MAAT, an Afrocentric framework for belonging. I would like to journey on this presentation by operationalizing the terms that we use in the title as context and content of this presentation. MAAT means truth. I'm about to get into that. But also it's Black Lives, you know, everybody's familiar with Black Lives Matter. Right? Some years ago, I was talking about Black Lives Matter, and what matter is absolute. It's in all spaces. Everything is matter. Right? Black people take up space. So not only do we matter in terms of we have value, but the fact that we take up space means to be that that value needs to be taken serious. Black Lives Matter, an Afrocentric framework for belonging. Black folk. Those that self-identify as persons of African descent, phenotypically and or culturally. The history of people of African descent here in America, later identified as black, are aware of the imposition of a colonizing and oppressive experience, like any other history of human beings and identity, as a social construction, is particularly complex. No effort at conceptualizing this term will fully embrace the nuanced experiences of these folk, nor the history of the term blackness as a term with significantly negative connotations in a racist world. Black, as the negative term, can at minimum be traced back to about the 3rd century Christian era. And the dichotomies presented by a Manichaean framework that came out of Persia as they conceptualized a duality of reality, where spiritual reality was light and good, and the material reality was dark and evil. But as we use black as a term for identity, irrespective of its contents, naming is particularly important. We don't want to say that some conceptual frameworks and historical narratives are not better than others. Black has its utility as a normative identity formation. That being said, using the term black, in part, runs the risk of tying this identity framework too tightly to the plethora of racist stereotypes that have dominated people of African descent in this colonized experience. One of the issues that can present itself is the reality that black folk and the social expressions produced by black folk are delegitimized by the broader racist community. Black philosophy is delegitimized. Black literature is delegitimized, viewed as being less than. Black music is less than European classical music, delegitimized. Black theater, y'all not professional, y'all playing games, delegitimized. Black studies, y'all doing some kind of marginal stuff over there, not contributing to these universal collection of knowledge as it relates to this institution and institutions of higher being. They all suffer the challenges of black people in terms of the struggles for legitimacy and recognition. When you attach black to it, it's a problem. And in part, what we are trying to do as we walk through this world is fight against that problem in a variety of different ways. Lives, human beings. having human experiences in the world. We exist within a social context that dominantly, yet not exclusively, has historically and presently challenged the humanity of black folk by the imposition of categories, justifications for those categories, institutions that support those justifications, and policies which regulate opportunities based upon those categorical justifications. These very real systems, in the end, have established norms that have dominated the social reality and or lived experiences of people of African descent. MAAT means truth. It means a lot of other things too. We're about to get into that. This term was used in ancient Kemet, KMT, or the consonants. We know those for a fact. Some people spell Kemet differently, different vowels. Some spell it KHAMIT or KIMIT. But we know for the fact that K, M, and the T is there. What does it mean? It means the black land or lands of the blacks. Another word, another frame for how we start to understand Kemet. What do we mean by Kemet? Names change over time. Names are living. Names are real. Words are real. Ancient Kemet was the name for those people that built those pyramids in Egypt. They called it Kemet. The word Egypt is a Greek word. We live in where are we at right now? What's the name of this nation? United States of America. It's important for us to understand how quickly things can shift. Indigenous people lived there. We on their land 400 years ago. Not a lot of people have indigenous friends. We might know of some, but indigenous friends. And this is their land. The point being, understand how quickly populations can shift. The use of Kemet is important for a variety of different reasons. But if we center on the historical assertion about the origins of civilization starting in Greece and Rome, when there was a tendency for those in Greece and Rome to look at Egypt as the shining intellectual light on the hill in the world at that time, this contradicts those that seek to conceptualize the truth in a way that would say that civilization actually started with the Greeks or the Romans. This is something I experienced just recently. Y'all heard of the MAAT Museum? The largest museum in the United States. The MAAT Museum just now opened up a new exhibit. And I think it started in December or so. The Brooklyn Museum did the same. Before you go into their Egyptian exhibits, particularly the MAAT Museum, there is an exhibit called The African Origin of Civilization. Bam! Brand new exhibit. It's not even 3 months old. Before you go to see Egypt, they made sure that you have to go through Africa. This is that institution. A legitimizing institution, a model of what we should understand of as it relates to world history. And in that particular context, they show the relationship between Africa and Egypt. Africa and Egypt. You see all of these artifacts. Africa and Egypt. Here go the African one, here go the Egypt one. Here go the African one, here Egypt. This is an accomplishment of work that people of African descent have been doing for a long time as they fight against the kind of colonialism, the dehumanizing attempts of people of European descent to say that black folk or people or Africans are not human, do not have a history, have not done anything worthy of examination. They made a shift, and in that, they didn't just do it and just leave it there. They did it. They also referenced Sheikh Anta Diop, who was a scholar out of Africa, and one of his, he centered a lot of his work around Egypt as a classical African civilization. One, because it's just a fact, but then two, because of what a lot of times people will admit that Egypt was a civilization, but they tend to attempt to take it out of Africa. He placed it back in Africa. When you go into the African Origins of Civilization exhibits, on the wall, huge, there's a quote from Sheikh Anta Diop that talks about the racism of European anthropologists. And they admit it. It's right there. They say, we did this, and now we apologize. This is the moment that we live in. It's not over, but that's something significant. Go check it out when you can. This is the work of our people. Just screaming to the world. We're human beings too. We are human beings. We've done a lot. We've been around for a long time. We don't want to erase anybody else's humanity. But we do want to put in check your claims of supremacy. You're not better than us, but we're not any better than you. That's all. But for those individuals who feel as though that they are superior to others, being the same as everybody else for them is a loss. So MAAT means truth. It's a complex idea, but in short, it's a way of describing the reality of the world, independent of our perspectives of the world. A way of acknowledging what is actually the case, and that it is descriptive in its strongest sense. A way of conveying that the world is not flat, it is round. Irrespective of whether I say it is flat, the world is round. Irrespective of whether I say that I'm not here having a conversation with y'all, it's going down. I'm having this conversation. I'm here. It's MAAT attempts to encapsulate that kind of truth. This is thoroughly African. In his book, A Lost Tradition, African Philosophy and World History, Theophile Benjamin, who was actually a protege of Sheikh Anta Diop, engages the ways that linguistic concepts of MAAT are distinctly expressed in no less than at least 10 African ethnic groups. MAAT has also been described as an expression of a monistic ontology. Fancy words, I'll just put it out there just to interpret it differently. A oneness of being. An expression of a social and natural order. We'll get into this a little bit more, but people familiar with this idea of, let's say, monotheism, right? An idea that there's one God. Monists say there's not just one God. Monists say there's one thing. And that thing you can call God. That thing is God. But whatever that one thing is, it exists everywhere, in all spaces, at all times. It right now, as I sit here and talk to you, is it talking to itself. Touching itself, smelling itself, belling itself. We'll tease this out a little bit more as we move forward. Afrocentricity. It's a paradigm, philosophy, perspective, standpoint that centers the African people in order to reassert African agency as a tool for sanity. It wants us to walk through the world on our terms. Why would you walk through the world off of somebody else's terms? All this is, you have value, you're a human being. Can we walk through the world on our terms? In other words, according to Malefi Keti Asante, it's placing of African ideals at the center of any analysis that involves African culture. In diversity, equity, and inclusion work, the use of the term centering, they say that a lot right now. If you're in DEI, we're going to center these people, we're going to center these folks, we're going to center these folks. It's the Afrocentricity is where it comes from. Language is funny. Just taken out one place, start and adopt it, use it in different spaces, different things like that. Language is just as real as you and I. Language is come into being and go out of being. Just like this table will one day. Just like all of us will one day. Belonging. Belonging is a home, right? It's intimately a reflection of feeling at home, complemented by self-imposed or world-imposed borders. So however you define your home, right, you create your own borders, but the world also defines its home, their homes, and also defines a home for you. It's always these borders that we create, these particular frameworks. Donisa Amante Jackson, who actually presented here, after the New Paltz, talks about belonging as an ongoing culture created to have all people feel welcome across difference, manifested in relationships, conversations, physical space, and the written world, and the written word. Right, so it's an ongoing culture. A culture of inclusion assumes that one feels a certain degree of ownership, respect, and/or value. A key part of belonging is identity. It's a complex term that should not be oversimplified in most spaces, as it engages issues about self-identity, which are intimately connected to one's worldview, how one views the world. And not always in a maximally consistent way. We always want things to be real clean. But the world is fluid, always constantly moving. It's this dialectic that's going on. We as individuals create our own borders as it relates to the complexities of self-identity. While broader public sphere and its cultural contours establishes its own borders, when they square, we feel closer to home. When things make sense to us, right? We feel, when they square, they feel closer to home. When they don't, we feel further away from home. If you feel as though that you're a human being and you should be able to drink from that water fountain, and you get access to that water fountain, you feel it's a place for home, and you feel as though that you belong. But if there are rules and regulations that say, no. The black water fountain around the back, you got to go around the back. And you're like, no, why should I have to go around the back? Why can't I just get water? I'm a human being just like everybody else. They say, no. You need to go around the back. You don't feel as though that you belong. Creating that sense of belonging. That's no more home for you. Segregation created policies that supported a worldview of racists and conflicted with the worldview of anti-racists. When we talk about culture, trying to create this culture of belonging, culture manifests itself in a variety of different ways, right? So etymologically, culture is related to the word colere, which means to grow, right? Or culture, like cultivate, right? But culture is the totality of experiences of an individual or group. There's also this idea of some human groups, when we first came and started attributing culture to human groups, some human groups don't have culture. And we tend to know who that came from, like as it relates to ideas of when we start looking at European culture, in the different ways in which racism manifests itself. Some human groups didn't have culture. And then, remember, words change. Right? So now we're going to use the same word. All right, well, you know what? Everybody has culture, but there's a high culture and there's a low culture. And then word changed a little bit more. Now it's more towards everybody has culture, and it's kind of equal. Cultural relativity. How is this related to the issue of what worldview? Worldview is particularly important in a variety of different ways. I will be giving some definitions of worldview and engaging this by amplifying the voices of a variety of different African American psychologists. But let me put it in some context real quick. Because this just happened. African American psychology. They wanted to prioritize culture in a variety of different ways. They wanted to promote ideas that sought to embrace people of African descent. But there were significant problems with that as it relates to them participating in their own discipline. So African American psychologists had to go and create their own field. Had to move out of the legitimizing order of psychology. Just last year, October 29th, 2021. This is what the APA statement has put out. We apology to the people of color for APA's role in promoting, perpetuating, and failing to challenge racism, racial discrimination, and human hierarchy in the U.S. Black folk had to come out of that space in the 1960s and create their own space. And what contributed to that was the racism that already existed within African American psychology, within American psychology. Worldview is a view of the world, or grand conceptual stream structured by basic assumptions generated by social and environmental impact that influence humans' consciousness and its ensuing culture. What's kind of funny about this is, remember, it says environmental impacts, social and environmental impacts that influence human consciousness. Our consciousness and our behaviors are impacted by a variety of different things. That ice storm hit the other day, I wasn't able to get home. I had to sleep in my office. So, in cold house, different things like that. You need to adapt. Anybody ever heard of seasonal affective disorder? When it's cold or cloudy outside and a lack of sun, it impacts your mood. But point being, the natural world shapes your consciousness in similar ways like human beings shape your consciousness too. It's always this push and pull that's going on. As you start to understand the ways in which you are connected, not just to your social environment, but at the same time, at all times, to your natural environment too. You can't even step outside of it. I don't even know what that looks like. But we'll tease that out a little bit more as we go forward. Linda James Meyer, an African-American psychologist, and self-identifies as an Afrocentric psychologist, right? Asks the question, why is the nature of the way we view the world so important? She said it is important because it ultimately determines our experience and our history. Sigmund Freud describes a worldview, an intellectual construction which solves all the problems of our existence uniformly on the basis of one overriding hypothesis, which accordingly leaves no question unanswered and in which everything that interests us finds its fixed place. November Ani asserts that the African worldview, and also in many non-European cultures, believes that the universe to which they relate is sacred in origin. Remember the libation we did, right? We're talking about how these things are sacred. Life and life, life and life. Honor your ancestors, they part of you, all these different things. Create these traditions. So then as you move forward, you are honored also by those unborn. She says that the African worldview believes that the universe to which they relate is sacred in origin, organic, and is true cosmos. A well-ordered whole. Everything is connected. It's a whole thing. It's a holistic way of looking at the world, at the universe. For Miranda Ani, the universe is one. Spheres are joined because of a single unifying force that pervades all beings. Leopold Senghor, in Negritude, a humanism in the 20th century, as it relates to the understanding of African philosophy of being. And what you see is a lot of Afrocentric psychologists use purposefully and with intention African philosophy to inform their ways of looking at the world. just in similar ways where you start to see European psychology being committed to European philosophies that came out of their culture. Leopold Senghor says, there is no such thing as dead matter. Every being, everything, be it only a grain of sand, radiates a life force. Rocks are not dead. They just live in the rock life. So we can see the views of the world give rise to notions of self, and notions of self give rise to views of the world, where Noble talks about the African concept of an extended self. And it reflects the polyvalent principle of the oneness of being. In this view, one does not place an emphasis on the individual or individuality that you tend to find in European culture. He goes further to state that, in this regard, we unashamedly align ourselves with the majority of the world's population in our rejection of a Cartesian duality and our acceptance of man as a spiritual being that lives in a spiritual reality. This is what it means to be a human being. Thus, knowledge of self also addresses the question of what it means to be a human being. An issue that continues to present itself with the racialization of the world that has shifted colonized folk of their own cultural access, is that there's an assumption which dominates many forms of resistance to white supremacy and racism. That assumption is that our dehumanization is best subverted when we appeal to the claim that we are human beings also. They're saying, you're not human, you're not human, you're not human. We say, yo, yes we are, yes we are, yes we are. I do think that there's been and can be meaningful advances in appealing to our similarity as a species, as we understand that if any human being is deserving of moral treatment, the argument tends to go, then we all are. Yet, what has tended to hinder African American philosophy is that it's race-based, in ways that African philosophy has avoided it. African philosophy tends to be culturally based. It's the acknowledgement that the use of the oppressor's idea about what it means to be human may lead us down similarly destructive pathways of social and environmental conflict. So as opposed to saying, I'm human, I'm human, I'm human, I'm human too, you buy into their idea of humanity. What did your people say about what it means to be human? Just look. Are you open to looking? Now, are they saying the same thing? Or is there something different going on? So why use their idea, look at yours, and then make a decision with more information? It's an acknowledgement that the use of the oppressor's idea of what it means to be a human may lead us down so many destructive pathways of social and environmental conflict. Note that I said environmental conflict. This fragmented worldview that situates itself in opposition to a holistic worldview not only justifies the erasure of its obligations to other people, there's no, I'm separate from you, I don't owe you anything. But it also supports the erasure of obligations to the environment. That tree is just an object. I can tear it down if I want to. That water is just water. I can poison the water if I want to. The air is just air. I can pollute the air if I want to. I have no obligations to the tree, to the water, to the air, none of that. I am in control. It is here for me, for it to serve my purposes. Whatever those purposes might be. There are no limits. Self-knowledge. Any concept of reality or worldview diverges the concept of self, and vice versa. Self-knowledge is an implicit aspect of all cultures as they develop conceptual frameworks about what it means to be a human being. The master teacher, Dr. Joseph Ben Jacquin, who actually was a former faculty here at SUNY New Paltz in the Black Studies Department. I mean, a lot of people might not be familiar with who he is, but if you go on YouTube, he's all over the place. Master teacher. And I was just looking through some historical documents in the department one day. I was like, oh, Dr. Ben taught here? Okay, all right. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling better. I'm feeling better. Because I feel good in this space. I love this space. I really do. So Dr. Ben, internationally known scholar, details the explicit African cultural engagement of self-knowledge in his book, Mother of Western Civilization. He states, Chutan no Tai, which means man know thyself, is an inscription which the indigenous Africans of Egypt wrote in the inside and outside of the temples and pyramids for thousands of years. He goes on further to state, the Egyptian mystery system's most important objective was the deification of man. They taught that man would be among the gods in his lifetime on earth and attain the beatific vision and holy communion with the immortal. So what does this look like? That's a pyramid. What's the significance of it? A lot of times you have a lot of different scholars talking about, okay, it was sacred, but at the end of the day, when you start to look at your African culture and tie African cultural ideals, you can find maximum consistency as it relates to what that pyramid means. In the beginning, there was one thing, the creator, whatever that creator might be. The creator. No space existed, no rocks existed, nothing. That creator had the ability to change itself. 1 turned to 2, 2 turned to 4, 4 turned to 8. It populated the world. It had the ability to change itself. We exist in a living universe. Within this perspective, God is everywhere, knows everything, and does everything. All powerful. We live in a spiritual world. So even when you look at, let's say, physics, when you look at this in physics, the term delta actually means change. Everything is changed. There is nothing that is not changed. This desk right now is vibrating. It's just vibrating at a slower rate than anybody else, than anything else around. It's changing. The molecules in there shake. I would pull it up, but I would waste time. It's all on YouTube. They show you. But the floor, moving. There's nothing that is not moving. You can't even point to it. Everything is changing. So then in a living universe, where everything is constantly moving, what is going on with your identity? What does it mean to be a human being within that particular context? Cultural psychology has talked about this in a variety of different ways. Remember, I talked about how you have Afrocentric psychologists and how they broke away from the APA. But is this field called cultural psychology that started to come, that manifests itself within academia in a variety of different ways. I want to get alternative perspectives as it relates, to give us some more context as it relates to what I am talking about in terms of this interdependence. What is culture?
Marcus and Kitayama call this process of shaping and being shaped mutual constitution. Within different cultural settings, it can produce very different psychological processes.
This is Philip Zimbardo.
They have described two of these possible modes of being as independent and interdependent.
Cultural psychology. You can find it on the internet.
The independent mode of being can be seen most clearly in the United States and Western Europe. The interdependent way is more characteristic of East Asian societies.
Everybody want to talk about Asia, but rarely talk about Africa.
In European American cultural settings, individuals think about themselves as responsible for behavior, as in control. They control their worlds by influencing other people. It's important to say what's important to you. If someone asks you what you like, say, I want a Diet Coke and a turkey sandwich, and say it very directly and be sure of yourself and make quick decisions.
I am in control. I'm a human being. I impose meaning on the world. The world doesn't
For
impose
many
meaning on
European
me.
Americans, making choices defines the self as unique and positive. It even influences how Americans treat their guests. At a party, American hosts will often say, "Help yourself." This statement would seem odd to many East Asians.
In Japanese cultural practice, greeting a guest wouldn't involve anything like offering a choice. You have to be attentive to your guest as a host, and if you're attentive enough, if you're a good enough person, morally adequate, then you ought to be able to tell and be prepared enough to offer what is good for this particular person.
This attunement to others' needs emanates from many sources in East Asian culture. One of these sources is Buddhism. Buddhism emphasizes sympathy, compassion, and transcendence beyond individual desire. Over the centuries, this powerful spiritual value has created a tendency to emphasize the well-being of others. Religion also contributes to the independent way of being in mainstream American culture through the Protestant ethic. It emphasizes individual achievement, personal responsibility, self-sufficiency, and control over the environment.
The American Black Psychology Organization, so remember, that's cultural psychology. They do the same thing, right? And it was created to create a psychology of the black experience that focused on improving the circumstances of black people. The initial purpose was to help black psychologists in a time of discrimination and to provide psychological resources to the larger black community. The founding psychologists believed that psychology was created mostly by white middle-class men, and they could not explain the situation of people of African descent. And again, they moved to incorporate ideas of African philosophy and cultural experience into the creation of a new understanding of black psychology. Spirituality. Within African context, when they talk about what spirituality is, they don't see a separation between spirit and matter. Matter is absolute. Matter is everything. Right? Spirit and matter are one. They don't see a separation between science and religion. If you study the world, you will come to start to understand that spirit and matter are one. This concept that came out of European cultural constructs, whereas though y'all want to constantly separate things and compartmentalize things and call it religion, now they're going to say, what do you mean religion is truth? Why are you separating this from everything else? Why are you separating nature from human beings? Where's nature at? If you live in a European context, out there, green space. A person of African descent will say, we are part of nature. This is nature right now. Right, this desk is nature. Right, the floor is nature. You can't step outside of it. The self and the other. There's another identity. Not only am I Anthony, not only am I a black man, not only am I a professor, not only am I a driver, right, but also another identity is that I am, in terms of the oneness, because the oneness is that only thing that exists is God, I am God. And if you have that divine identity, I don't see no separation between myself and everything else around. Therefore, I should act as if you're part of me. That's why every time I walk in my classroom, my students know, they hear me say, I love you. And I mean it. I don't care who you are. If you exist, you're part of me. I say, how y'all doing? Anything happening in your life that you would like to share today? Why? Because I care. You're not just a student, you're a complex human being. There's a lot of other things going on. But number one of those things that's also going on is we all in this together in an interdependent world. What I do shapes you, what you do shapes me, you're part of me. I need to act like it. You have some cultures that recognize it, other cultures that don't. So that distinction between the self and other, in terms of that divine identity, doesn't exist. It's an idea that when you start looking at a variety of different African-American psychologists, they were talking about it as being, Dr. Wade Nobles would call it, an extended self concept. Y'all heard the phrase within African culture, it takes a village to raise a child? Because in society, everything that's going on in that village is shaping that child's life. If that lady could care less about what that kid is doing when that kid is going down the street, that's shaping that child's life too. If that lady really cares about what that kid is doing when that kid is going down the street, that's shaping that kid's life too. At all times, there's an interdependence. And that interdependence implies a unity. If we weren't connected, I couldn't touch you. For some reason, I couldn't touch you. If there was no fundamental and basic thing that holds everything together, I would not be able to touch it. So what's that thing that holds everything together? Africans call it God. I know I'm God, but when I say that, all I'm saying is, only thing that exists is God. It's monistic, not monotheistic. One. That being said, let's check out this idea of spirituality.
So it becomes a part of the legacy of a people.
An important part of that legacy is spirituality, the belief that higher powers influence human affairs. Spirituality has imparted serenity and strength to many African Americans to help cope with the injustices of their society.
The most religious demographic in America is the black woman.
They can live with circumstances that others would find depressing and demoralizing.
According to Pew Research,
they don't hold unto themselves responsibility for everything that happens. So in a sense, they're free and they're at peace. They can be at peace.
That's why I'm going to tell the truth when I got to tell the truth. And let everything else come.
American Indians have also had to adjust to overwhelming adversity. In the 19th century, the tidal wave of Western expansion resulted in a genocide that decimated native cultures. Despite the many hardships that American Indians have faced, over 500 American Indian tribes are still in existence in the United States. Dr. Joseph Trimble, a cross-cultural psychologist of American Indian heritage, studies how American Indians have adapted to and influenced mainstream American culture.
This is what culture gets you, not just race.
Historically, all tribes were collective cultures, organized along very, very elaborate clan systems. Everyone was given a role and responsibility, and that role and responsibility was an integral part of keeping life alive, keeping the community alive, keeping the village alive.
This special sense of community is common to most American Indian cultural contexts and is expressed in many Indian spiritual understandings and practices.
Spirituality is respect for all things, for all that is, for all that lives. The two-leggeds, the four-leggeds, the winged, the plants, the trees, the clouds, the earth that we live in, the earth we live on. And with that respect is this understanding that we're all connected.
One way to honor that connectedness is through a tradition of sharing. Unconditional giving honors the universe and maintains life's balance.
I'm going to share with you.
But it was a tradition that confused other peoples.
It makes you feel as though you belong.
A lot of non-Indian people have real difficulty with that. Because they feel like they're now obligated, that they're now owned, because they have been the recipient of this gift.
When Columbus came to America, he was showered with gifts. When he refused them, the native leaders were insulted.
He said, I don't owe you nothing.
To be such a problem that he actually prevented his troops from receiving gifts, which in turn insulted the people themselves. You're not just insulting this individual, you're insulting that individual's family. You're insulting a clan. So here's this very deep-seated value that has never gone away.
I want to share. Ain't we supposed to share? And Columbus said, no, we're not supposed to share nothing. I fight for mine. I don't owe you nothing.
European colonizers
and what they say, we all owe each other stuff.
The history of how American Indians were forced to adapt to European American culture is horrific. The melting pot ideology assumed that native peoples should assimilate readily and completely to dominant cultural patterns.
It was the whole idea behind sending young Indian people off to boarding schools, forbidding them to speak their language, forcing them to cut their hair, forcing them to wear clothing that were totally foreign to them, forcing them to deal with people who were from different tribes who they didn't know or understand. All of them in that setting being forced to change.
Y'all need to be like us. You can't be yourself anymore. We know what's right for you. And as it relates to this idea of interdependence, there was actually a scholar that just visited us. I think it was, it might have been yesterday, actually. And his name is Dr. Don Trent Jacobs, otherwise known as Four Arrows. And here's a little video from him that speaks about this idea of interdependence, this cultural idea.
The earth is suffering. Climate change, pollution, and pandemics are some of the consequences of human-created assaults on our world. According to the United Nations Biodiversity Report, 1 million more species face imminent extinction, including us. We must live on Earth differently, if not for ourselves, for future generations. 80% of global biodiversity now exists on only 20% of the Earth. It is no coincidence that this small amount of land is mostly managed by indigenous cultures. According to 450 multidisciplinary scientists, extinction rates have been less severe or avoided entirely in these areas held by indigenous people. We can all learn to live with greater respect for our non-human life forms. This is possible if we embrace the worldview that has guided us throughout our existence on this planet. In contrast to the dominant worldview, the indigenous one truly emphasizes our relationship to the land, the environment, and all its interconnected inhabitants. Without remembering this oneness with all of life, we are doomed. Regional and global scenarios currently lack explicit considerations of the indigenous worldview. It is also important that we do our best to protect and support the remaining indigenous cultures. They are fighting against all odds to protect the last of Earth's biodiversity. And while doing this, we can all re-embrace the worldview indigenous peoples share. We can come to understand that human relationship with nature is a continuous two-way dialogue, that natural resources are better thought of as relatives and teachers. Gratitude is essential. The universe is constantly in flux. Time is circular. Respect for diversity, equality, and justice is crucial. spirit is in all things, and that human knowledge must be joined by a fearless trust in the unknowable mysteries of nature. Let us remember who we really are and reestablish our intended way of being with respect, generosity, gratitude, and of course, the happiness that comes from this. Matakwe Oyasi, we are all related.
Creating cultures of belonging, shifting your worldview. I'm a sustainability faculty fellow here at the university. There are a variety of different frameworks used with respect to the issue of sustainability. The framework that I use is environmental justice. This is a preamble of the environmental justice movement. We, the people of color, gathered today at this multinational People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit to begin to build a national and international movement of all peoples of color to fight the destruction and taking of our lands and communities, do hereby reestablish our spiritual interdependence to the sacredness of our Mother Earth, to respect and celebrate each of our cultures, languages, and beliefs about the natural world and our roles in healing ourselves, to ensure environmental justice, to promote economic alternatives which would contribute to the development of environmentally safe livelihoods, and to secure our political, economic, and cultural liberation that has been denied for over 500 years of colonization and oppression, resulting in the poisoning of our communities and the land and the genocide of our peoples. Do affirm and adopt these principles of environmental justice. MAAT, Chukwani Kamalo, helps to define MAAT. Remember, this is an old system, so people that heard of, and this is a different lecture, right, for a different time, but as it relates to the ideas of the 10 Commandments, the idea of MAAT, as it relates to us understanding that there's order in the world, MAAT, you'll generally see, and I showed it at the beginning of the lecture. I'll show you a picture of what she looks like. Where you going? Generally viewed as that. Those are 42 feathers. The 10 Commandments is 10 Commandments. MAAT has 42. All of the 10 are amongst those 42. But certain cultures left out another 32. So that's a different lecture. I could get more in depth in that, but I'm trying to establish a framework, understanding about what's going on. It seems that the spirit of MAAT has not been lost in the recesses of African consciousness, for traditional African thought still really makes the connection between the notions of truth, natural law, and justice. MAAT, therefore, has both a moral and physical significance which embodies the theoretical ideas of absolute truth, absolute natural law, and unfailing causation. Unfailing causation. In contrast, modern Western science and belief does not seem to possess a comparable concept embodying both science and ethics in parallel. Ethics and morals and stuff, that's for religious stuff. That's a whole different thing. That's not for science. They become compartmentalized in ways in which are overly compartmentalized, in ways in which they don't have to be. So belonging, what does belonging look like within this particular culture, context? As we are trying to establish a framework for belonging, not just here on campus, but as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion work. What does belonging look like? I was at a program just on Sunday. And I brought up this question as it relates to what's the relationship between Afrocentricity, Afrocentric thought, and diversity, equity, belonging, and inclusion. And the response by that scholar was, they have not been paired as of yet. And my response was, I know I'm about to do it in 2 days. As we seek to create a culture of belonging, Black studies as the institutionalization of Black thought and Black experience, which is a uniquely interdisciplinary discipline, is continuously making institutional and cultural advances that are embraced by many, but on balance continues to be overlooked, erased, and underdeveloped by racist institutions, not unlike the very human experiences of Black folk in a racist social context. It's also important for us to understand attacks on critical race theory is an attack on Black studies, period. It's a simple understanding that what they're trying to do is narrow the framework as it relates to how we need to understand the American experience. And they're saying it's our way or the highway. And as we start to understand that educational systems, schools, are socializing institutions. They reflect, maintain, and create a society, whatever those ideals are, that individuals would like. So what is in the educational institutions will impact what kind of society that you're moving towards. Those individuals that are against critical race theory want a racist society. Y'all get it? Anybody not following? Y'all see how that works? We are anti-racist institutions. Remember, it's always a process. It's always a process. And we have made some advances. But are we there yet? Do we give up fighting? You shouldn't. Now, as it relates to all of the different things, because remember, Black studies is the institutionalization of Black space. Black studies still being underfunded. Black studies still being disrespected. We're ahead of the game on this. We got this. Y'all just starting to learn this stuff. The African APA, they just came out with an apology about how racist we were. You know, all the sustainability, they start talking about these ideas of interdependence and stuff like that. African folk been talking about this for thousands of years. Now y'all want to get a, can we get some acknowledgement as we start to move forward, but not just acknowledgement, some resources and respect. But again, a lot of times people feel as though that it's a loss for them because at the end of the day, you got to give something up. Even as it relates to the move of Black studies here on campus, and it was an excellent thing, good stuff, but it took 30 years to do it. I'm not trying to pull nothing, I'm just speaking truth. I love new partners. I'm telling you, I do. All right. Speaking truth. It took 30 years to do it. But then also, so we will actually be moving right out here. Black studies is going to be right down this hallway, all in the space. Right? We're going to create the space and create a space of belonging within this particular context. But it's also important for us to understand that when they made this move, they said that we had to move some other people out. That's what justice looked like. That's what justice looked like. And I'm thinking about writing a paper as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Should I put it out there? I don't care. Because if I don't write it, let somebody else write it. Equity is about issues of justice. Equity is really about issues of reparations. It's not about treating everybody equally. It's about recognizing that you might have to shift resources to individuals that may have been underfunded in the past. So we can have equal outcomes. Making people whole again, repay for all of the damage that has been done. Now, thank you for that. But I can't jump up in the air before. All right. But I acknowledge the fact that some people are going to have to move. I understand. But where have we been for the last 30 years? Belonging. Maulana Karenga. All right, so this is actually a person that created Quine. All right, so here's his 7 grounds of relevance for the importance of the discipline of Black studies. Black studies is a definitive contribution to the humanities' understanding of itself. It's definite contribution to America's understanding of itself. Right? They attack the CRT because they don't want America to have a different perspective and understand itself. They want to ignore the past. They want to ignore all the damage they have done. There's a definitive contribution to the university's claim to teach the whole truth or something as close to it as humanly possible. Right? All these different perspectives, bring them all in. University, universal knowledge. Come on, bring them all in. It is the definitive contribution to the rescue and reconstruction of black history. Remember what the MAAT just did. That shift. Get on board. Get on board. No, it wasn't easy. But get on. But it was the right thing to do. It is a definitive contribution to a new social science and humanities. Y'all heard of this thing called interdisciplinary studies, right? Black studies has been doing that, and we got the foundations to show you why that's the case. That's my kind of specialty, too. I'm about to get into that. Well, I already got a book there to speak to this particular issue. Black studies is changing the world. It is a contribution to the development of the black intelligentsia coming out of our community. It is a vital contribution to the critique, resistance, and reversal of the progressive Europeanization of human consciousness and culture, which is one of the major problems of our time. What does belonging look like? What does belonging look like? Now, I think, therefore I am, so that's Cartesian, right? That comes out of Europe about what it means to be a human being. Consciousness in my head. I think, therefore I am. What European worldview did was they took the consciousness that existed in the universe, because everything is consciousness, and they put it in the head of human beings. They said, we run things. Animals don't have consciousness, but animal behaviors will tell you, no, yes, they do. Mm-hmm. Plants don't have consciousness, but, and I forget the name for them folks. Right. But they'll tell you that plants have consciousness. They were just doing this thing on campus last semester, drawing plants and stuff like that, and understanding how roots talk to each other and how they make way for one another. Like, this stuff is real. Science is starting to grasp a concept that indigenous cultures knew a long time. So why don't the university embrace that, stand in front of it, move forward? At the end of the day, it's in the best interest of everybody. So it's not I think therefore I am, but I am because we are. I'm part of the village. We all in this together. Y'all, the rest of the world, my sociality is what supports me and creates my identity. Not a bootstrap myth, that idea that you got to pull yourself up like a bootstrap. Right? It's about you, a radical individualism. Right? Remember that video that we watched in Culture? Western culture tends to be independent. Eastern culture tends to be interdependent. Not a bootstrap myth, not this independent stuff, but an interdependent. It takes a village to raise a child so the child can raise the village. Reality. Not an egoistic present about me and my ego. It's just about I, it's about me. It's about me. Right? But an ecological future. Eco. Everything is connected. It's part of me. I got obligations to other human beings. I have obligations to the trees, to the water, to the air, to everything. Because everything I do and don't do impacts them. And as Martin Luther King would say, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Matter of fact, if it's happening over there, you should be concerned about it. You might not be able to do anything about it, but at the end of the day, your absence is impacting that process. Just because it's not in your backyard don't make it any less wrong. A shared home, based upon a shared worldview and a shared identity. Shared sense of belonging. When you walk through a space and you feel as though that it's part of you, you walk a little bit different. I know I belong here. I know I'm trying to bring more people in. Others may not always make me feel as though that I belong. But even in spite of that, I'm fighting against that and bringing you in. Come here, give me a hug. Creating a shared sense of belonging based upon a shared worldview and a shared identity. Peace, God, and oneness. Hotep. And Hotep actually means peace in ancient Kemet. Thank y'all very much. I appreciate y'all for being in this space and help me get this thing done. Because remember, everything that you do and don't do help me. Y'all could have started throwing rocks at it. No, really, I mean, serious, understand. That interdependence, all right, I didn't happen by myself. I had a student today that told me in class, like I'm always asking my students, how y'all doing, anything you would like to share? I have a student, and I know that she would not mind me sharing, but I'm not going to mention her name, but tell the entire class. And she told us last week she was in a car accident, got rear-ended, right? She said yesterday she was in another car accident, got rear-ended again in the same spot by somebody else. Totaled her car, and then tried to, don't call the insurance company. My point being, an example that I always like to talk about as it relates to the interdependence of our reality is, a lot of times when you leave a space and you get home, you did it by yourself. You don't do anything by yourself in an interdependent world. All it takes is for that car to come across that line. That's all it takes. You're dependent upon all of this stuff around you. I'm dependent on y'all. Thank you so much. I really feel that. Thank you. I appreciate you. I want to hold y'all up. And that's that joy that I carry with me. And that kind of energy, people feel it. And I just want to share that kind of energy with y'all. I want y'all to walk in that joy. And part of it, this conceptual frame, this whole oneness thing, because I see everything as being part of me. I love y'all. Come here. But what kind of questions or kind of comments do we have? Anything? What we got? Where we at? Go.
You mentioned earlier that this is the second Black Studies department in New York, or just
on the entire planet.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Wow.
And the entire planet. Number two, and that was just actually confirmed lately when in another Zoom meeting that I was in. Yeah. Number two, and we should be proud of that. We should be proud of that. Hold that up. Sign it. Any other questions? Well, if there are no more questions, I would like to thank y'all for how y'all walking through the world, and this will be conclusion to today's engagement and manifestation of the A.J. Williams Myers lecture series. My name is Anthony Dandridge. Peace. Get home safe.